Welcome to the Digital Agency Growth Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Englander.
Mike, nice to have you on the show.
Hey, Dan. I am really happy to be here. We have known each other a long time, so it's very cool to do this.
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad we got reacquainted again. It's been a weird last couple of years with everything, as we all know. And I got a chance to dig into your book, the Hype Handbook, and there's so much that I learned about you that I never knew from reading it in like the early chapters and everything. But I guess before we get into that, can you talk a little bit about your background and kind of how you're approaching this topic of hype?
Yeah, whenever I'm asked this question, I always wonder if I should tell the gigantic long story or pretend I'm going to tell the short story and then end up telling the long story. But I mean, the short version is
whatever works.
Yeah. Well, the very short version is I own a company called Microfame Media, which has evolved a lot. I mean, it went from me being a solo demand generation copywriter about a little over a decade ago when I left my corporate job, to finding out that the way I was marketing or hyping up my writing services was kind of unique, more unique than I thought. And people wanted that more than the writing. So it became an unusual agency with a traditional model. And over the last couple of years, I really realized that it was very important to bake what I call hype. And we'll talk about that. But this idea of getting huge emotion around certain ideas to sell, your products and services, that it's not enough to just do that for people. What really works is to kind of bake it into their DNA. So we over the last 3 or so years, we altered the company to make sure that happens. So it's kind of a combination of an agency and consultancy at this point. But by and large, we work with idea-driven companies, and we help them build really big audiences first, or really big or dedicated audiences to help them get to their goals.
Very cool. And what I liked about it, or no, one of the things I like, I should say, is just kind of how you baked in your journey and your experience in the beginning of the book. And a recurring theme with, successful people like yourself that I've had on the show, me to some lesser extent, is having a background in music and starting a band and all the sort of enterprise hustle entrepreneurship that goes into making that happen. So you can talk about that a little bit, but my biggest question is, how did you get onto Showtime at the Apollo, and why were you booed off the stage?
Yeah, it's funny. I think I'm a writer at heart, and I don't just mean a copywriter. For many years, I wanted to be a novelist, and I still write fiction, and I've always been a big reader of all kinds of books, not just business books. And I think the music thing was a form of writing for me. I was never a great guitar player, but wrote good songs. And I read about these writers that I love, these older writers like Jorge Luis Borges and these kind of people, and they all tried their hand at poetry. And I always wondered about that because I have no interest in that at all. And no novelists who become poets. But every novelist I know, not just entrepreneurs, they tried their hand at being in a band, So I think that's like the new trying to be a poet. But the difference between that and being a poet is there is a lot of hustle required, right? I mean, if you're going to have any success at it at all, which we didn't financially, but we did in terms of building a big audience and getting some notoriety, you have to learn to hype things up. So that's really where I got the term hype, because we never thought of it as marketing. We thought of it as hype, and we had some success with that. And yeah, Showtime at the Apollo was part of that. We were always trying to be really mischievous, and we were much like the Beastie Boys, I think, often driven by how can we get a rise out of people and also make ourselves laugh while also drumming up a lot of attention. So Showtime at the Apollo, they boo people off that they don't like. And we knew we were like the opposite of anything anyone in that audience would ever like. We were like this weird glam punk band, and I can't really sing. I kind of like, did that punk rock thing kind of in tune, could carry a tune, but so we stood in line and there was an open call, and we just made sure we were as ridiculous as possible. We did this like kind of soul doo-woppy song that was like really weird, that kind of could have been Showtime at the Apollo, but obviously not. And so we just knew we would be like they always put someone on there, and we dressed really outlandishly. I used to wear a top hat and these really like Willy Wonka clothing, and everyone else was in like whatever, just street clothes. So, I mean, I guess it was a hunch, and we thought that we would get put on there as the token get booed off people, and we did. So, and we got attention for it. Like the underground press, like the New York press covered us and all that kind of thing, so it worked really well.
Yeah, and it's there, and there's so many colorful examples that you talk about in the book of the music world embodying this, and then but it also goes back to ancient Rome and all, all throughout history. But one of the first and I think most applicable principles of hype is the chapter you have that's make war not love. So can you talk about that a little bit, particularly how you got into a fight with Gary Vee and what kind of inspired that?
Yeah, I think on my tombstone, it's going to say like Michael F. Schein, 1977 to, 2400, whenever, picked a fight with Gary Vaynerchuk. I think I'm like,
Well, and got him to fight back.
That
I think
was
a lot
that
of
was the main
that's
thing.
the, yeah.
And I also have some sort of reputation now, some measure of success, but I had nothing then. This was like 11 years ago. I had just left my corporate job to go out on my own. I was not doing well. And I had talked my way into having a column in Inc. And, I think the bands I played in were punk bands. And I think that not so much anymore, but for the most of the history of that kind of music, it was about, like, you would hear bands like early Devo in their early career, who was considered a punk band in the beginning, cleared a room when they opened for Sun Ra. And that wasn't a negative. That was a positive. That's like part of their story. Right. So like, I always had that aesthetic. And so I wrote an article called Why Gary Vaynerchuk is Flat Out Wrong. And if you read the article, I say this all the time, I don't think I was disrespectful at all. And he even admitted that when he responded to it. In fact, I called him a great business person and all of this, but he was really hardcore with the hustle thing back then, less so now. He's moderated his message because it's not sticking the way it used to after the pandemic and all of that.
Yeah.
But I basically said that telling kids to tweet from the toilet and work 19 hours a day doing the work themselves is making Gary rich and isn't really helping these kids. And they needed to learn how to build systems. And that, I think that was threatening to him because it undermined the whole basis of his internet guruship. So he responded to me personally because it was in Inc. And I got a little bit lucky because he was on the cover of the print edition that month, which I didn't know. And so he got really agitated. I mean, you could tell. I mean, he didn't make a whole lot of sense. And people started blowing up my Twitter and telling me I was an idiot and I thought I had ruined my career. And it turned out it was the beginning of my career. I started to gain a following because there were all these people who thought like me who weren't standing up against it. And I think the lesson in that, what I really took from that, is that we're always so worried about taking a bold stand. And even when we say we're going to take a bold stand, we don't. We tend to pull our punches. And this isn't the same as being a troll. This isn't insulting someone's looks. This isn't calling someone an idiot, nothing like that. This is about looking at your industry or your corner of the universe and saying, what is that popular point of view that is almost gospel, that people accept just because it's just unquestioned? And if you truly disagree with it and no one has spoken up about it, even if you haven't clarified your own thinking, go out publicly with a firm point of view that you disagree with it and give a better alternative. And if you're scared to do it, that means it's probably bold, because there are other people who will be woken up by that. And we do this with clients. We'll say, go through your industry and list all of the cliches that are commonly used and now debate that cliche. So in one case, someone said, our people are our greatest asset. And you would say, well, of course they are. I mean, who could disagree with that? No, they're not. So we thought about it, and the person thought, our people aren't our greatest asset. Our customers are our greatest asset, and our people serve our customers. And when you don't place your customers first and you pay this empty homage to people, first of all, it's usually BS. And second of all, you're not serving your customers. Do we all agree with that? You don't have to agree with it, but it fit their service and it fit their industry and it helped them stand out. So it's a great exercise to go through.
Yeah. And where my head kept going is like, sometimes there's this kind of oblique path, right? Where you have to take an indirect path to getting somewhere else. And we've heard so much about mission and purpose and principles, and everybody nods their head, but finding out what those are for your company and doing it in a way that's specific enough to actually be applicable and not just hand wavy corporate jargon is really hard. It takes a lot of time. So one thing that I think I liked about your
can I
book,
chime in about one thing?
Mm-hmm.
while I know what people mean by mission and vision and principles, and while those words were probably very meaningful at one point, words become diluted with time. So when someone says to me, we want our mission statement, I'll tell them we're not going to do a mission statement. Because what a mission statement means now is slapping together a bunch of corporate jargon that makes the largest number of people happy. I say, come up, I want to hear your contrarian point of view. I want to hear your point of view at this point. What is the leader's point of view and what is the company's point of view? Why do you exist?
Yeah. And the reason I got on this angle was I finished another book called Working Backwards, which was by a bunch of Amazon execs. And if you read Amazon's principles, it is relatively contrarian and specific. But what I like about your book is I think it's actually a roundabout way of figuring out what those are for you or your organization.
Yeah.
Especially the make war, not love angle. To dig into that and not to put you on the spot, but are there other areas that you have for yourself right now in the marketing world, in the business world, other sacred cows you'd like to slaughter maybe?
Oh,
Yeah.
Gosh, I mean, I feel like I slaughter sacred cows all the time without even trying to, and I get myself in trouble. I mean, I think a lot of times I'm just simultaneously skeptical and fascinated by the people who were so able to get large numbers of people emotional and excited. And my whole thing is, I'll look at people who have a really great product or service or do a really great thing, someone like Warren Buffett, but who also is really, really well known. And it's not just because of his money. He's a down home guy, et cetera, et cetera. He crafted that image. And I'm not saying it's cynical, but it serves him. The whole thing about having a Coke and a burger and he lives in a small house. I'm not saying he's lying. He's probably not. But that helps institutions and people trust him in deals in a way that a different persona wouldn't.
Yeah.
But he's very good at what he does. And I would say, as far as finance is concerned, he does more good than harm. And then you have gurus. I'll just say the names because I think they're harmful. Grant Cardone and Ty Lopez, where even Ed Milet, who has a big front-facing display on the 46th Street Barnes and Noble. And these people, they talk about their private jets and their thing. And I dig really hard into what they sell besides self-help, and I can't tell. Like, it says something on the Ed Milet page, but he worked for something before he became a coach called World Financial Services. Like, what is that? So I look at those people who I truly believe are selling advice based on advice, advice all the way down. You know what I mean?
Right.
There's nothing really there. And then I look at people like Steve Jobs and Warren Buffett, who however you feel about them as people, have created real value. And the tactics and strategies and methods they use to communicate either emptiness or a whole lot of something are pretty identical. And you see that time and again. You can see a horrible dictator who built a cult of personality and an activist like Martin Luther King. And if you peel away the content, the way they interacted with crowds, the way they framed reality can really be boiled into X number of categories. I use 12. It could be 13. It could be 11. But there really is a finite number of mass psychology triggers that get large number of people into that state of ecstasy that causes them to follow people and take action.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think that in business coach / consulting world, you sort of see this implied force of the power of information, right? They're like, I have the secrets and I'll give you the secrets, as opposed to a process that people go through to reveal those things to themselves, right? Which is why, whenever you kind of come across the business coach model where they're trying to scale infinitely and it's group calls, and I'm not against group calls, like we've done versions of that ourselves, but it's different than the coaches that I've had the best experience with that are sort of have already like made all their money and they have like 5 clients and they do this because they like it. And
have they done anything with this stuff? I mean, why are they only teaching it,
Right, exactly. And that's the big part of it is like, are you actually out there? Are you the man in the arena doing things? Are you creating a hologram
besides,
of the hologram of the hologram, right?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, which people still adhere to this day,
Yeah.
and made a whole lot of money off of that program and that book. I saw this big expose and it was very well reported. And the guy lied about all of it. He was a complete failure till he wrote that book. So the guy made all his money teaching people how to get rich, but he had never gotten rich. So one way of looking at that is the secret is find suckers who want to get rich quick and write a book for them. But I think there's a different lesson, because we're not here to bust gurus. The point is, what let Napoleon Hill do that when other people couldn't? And can you apply it to something without lying? Can you apply it to something that's worthwhile? And I would say, yes. So let's use that example. I talk in my book about a concept called build a rock, right? Create a rock. And the idea is that life is very uncertain. Life is very difficult. If you can give recipes, if you can boil the complexities of life down into a recipe that's confidently stated, it's very useful, right? So Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, his partner, has Munger's X number of cognitive distortions, and it's put out, as like a Bible. It's like, if you understand these distortions, you'll understand the market based on reality. But the way it's framed is very useful. Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, right? So it was the Depression, and there was not a good social safety net yet. And he wrote this Bible, basically, hey, if you're not rich, it's not because the world financial system collapsed. It's because your positive thought patterns aren't proper. So if you follow these 17 chapters or whatever it is, you'll get your head right so you can make money. And so if you're writing a business book, for example, you can write a business book, which can be useful, but the people who do it really well, they create a Bible. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Think and Grow Rich, right? It's like all your answers is here. Tai Lopez does it, the 67 steps. Everyone I know who took the program, the steps are like read books, and like eat well. And it's like, give me your $900, right? But just calling it the 67 steps to success it's very basic, but giving people a recipe by which to live their lives is really effective. Now, if you have good stuff to back it up, that's how you can really change the world.
Right. And that's interesting. I think that one thing that happens is ad fatigue, right, is one way to put it, or format fatigue or approach fatigue. And we've seen this happen where the Tai Lopez stuff, X ways to do this, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Now, if you were to write that sort of book or lean too heavily into that, everyone's gonna put up their guard and everything. So can you talk about that a little bit? Like how does evolution and ad fatigue and these sort of things affect how you use hype?
This is such a key point, and I'm extremely happy that you're unearthing this, because people struggle with this, right? So what people do is they see a certain technique or tactic being used, and they say, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People worked, or the 67 steps work. If I write a similar book or article, that will work. And as you said, it's too late already, right? Everyone knows about it. The market might be different, et cetera, et cetera. The way to get around that is to understand the mass psychology principle and then conduct small experiments with the idea that you have no idea what version of that will work, right? So there's a big difference between, I'm going to follow exactly what Tai Lopez did, and I'm just going to write 5 pieces of content about anything a week. Both of those are bad, right? You hear, do consistency. Well, that consistent what? I said consistently boring articles that don't hit psychological triggers. But on the other hand, just following exactly what someone else does, it's too late. People are fatigued. So let's say that build a rock is your idea, right? And you know that concept works and you've internalized that hype principle. What is the smallest executable step, the smallest experiment you can do that plays with that principle, but that's different on purpose, that's creative, that's interesting, that stands out? So maybe it's an assessment of some kind, or maybe it is revealing something at the end of a pre-planned talk that no one's ever heard before. Maybe it's the Jerry Maguire memo. I don't know. It's more that it's not about use these template headlines. It's, we know that human beings respond to this type of psychology. How can we quickly do experiments and knowing most of them will fail, but knowing the psychology gives us a better chance than if we didn't. And then making sure you have a process in place to eliminating the quick ones before the bad ones, before they get costly and before they make you look like a fool in public. Because if you do that enough times and you're armed by the right fundamental knowledge, you'll have a hit eventually.
Yeah. And it kind of made my brain go to what we're doing, at Sales Scheme all day, which is trying to get very skeptical, resistant, sold to people to agree to spend time with our clients, basically. And then usually, and I'm not, this may slot into one of your principles, but usually the messaging is kind of old school. It's sometimes a little bit longer. It doesn't look there's no 37x, there's no marketing copy. It's there's typos, but it looks like something that is genuine, that's rough around the edges and real. And it also, the other thing, I think it's sub communicating,
and it works, right? That's the important thing.
It works.
If the typos didn't work, it would have been called a mistake. But the fact that the typos work, maybe that accidentally became the thing that you replicate. Maybe you put the typos in on purpose, right?
Exactly. There's that, but the bigger thing that I think we're replicating, and I'll give you the floor to kind of see if and where this slots into to your work, is the status element of it, right? Or I shouldn't even say status, but the tribe element, where it's like, we might know some of the same people, we might be in the same world, we might cross paths. There might be a social cost to you ignoring this or not getting back to me. Not saying that flat out, but kind of sub-communicating that.
I think so. The tribe element is so important. So actually, this actually is a good segue into explaining how this concept of strategies over specific tactics works so well. So I'll just talk about my own career because that's all that I know. But I think there's a direct line, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong. But there's a concept that I call build a secret society, which essentially means that it's kind of like networking on steroids. So what it basically means is that the most successful hypes, as I call them, which is everyone from Warren Buffett to the bad guys, make it seem like all of their success is grassroots. But what they do at the same time is they nurture a very close-knit group of people beneath the surface that will pull strings for them and accelerate their success. And the way they do that is by giving them things that are cheap for them to give up, both in time or money, and extremely valuable for other people. Okay. So how do most people digest that message? They do the networking thing, right? So you go to a networking meeting and everyone sits around, and the leader of the networking group, God bless them, always says some version of the same thing. If you give introductions and make introductions and do favors, the universe, without expecting anything in return, the universe will pay you back and give you leads. So people do this thing almost to the letter, which can be very valuable, by the way, where they go to these networking events, they go to these meetings, they sit down for coffee or do Zoom. Then they send out 3 introductions. John meet Bill, Bill meet John. You need to know each other. Take it from here, and they just expect that'll happen. And that could be really useful. But the problem is everyone is doing it. So now when someone calls me up and says, I really want to find out how I can help you. I'm a real helper. I really am here to serve. And I'm here, to do good because I'm sure the universe will pay me back. I'm like, you're BSing me, dude. I mean, I know what you're doing. I mean, come on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. But if you truly understand the principle of this tribe building, as you call it, but this big picture tribe building, not the small picture, then you get creative. You think in terms of what can I give up that's cheap to me? How can I work those levers? So something I did recently, you conduct experiments and you make sure the experiments are bold. So I thought, what's something that's cheap for me to give up? Well, at the time, I needed to write a column a week for Psychology Today, which I was writing for. So I'm just hungry for articles. I'm tossing them off. Mm-hmm. So I look at people my book was coming out and I said, I want to get on as many podcasts in a short period of time as possible, because I know that'll sell books and that kind of thing. Well, what can I give them? How about a spot in my column? So I wrote every podcaster that I admired, and I said, you're on my short list for a top 25 marketing podcasts that have a psychological bent, right? And then I put in the email, by the way, I just had a book come out. I was on 75 podcasts in 2 months. Mm-hmm. Creative idea. Sold a lot of books, got me business. Here's the sequel. It stopped working. It worked for a year and a half. I made hundreds of thousands of dollars in new business. Who knows how much I made or did from the book? And because of different things, Psychology Today changed their guidelines. People stopped responding to it. Maybe other people are using it. Okay, we move on. But if you're hyper fixated on the tactic, if I tried to sell a program where I taught you how to write this certain email template to get people to put you on their show, and then it stopped working, everyone is out of luck.
Yeah.
This is harder. This is the complexity of life. It's much nicer to know that you have a formula.
Yeah, and it's nice to trick ourselves into thinking we're going to get to some place where we figured out all these repeatable tactics that you can just turn on and it doesn't turn off. I think the one way I've heard it put better is business is more like a merry-go-round that you can push and it'll go on its own for a little while,
Right.
but then it stops, then you have to push it again, right? So
Right.
I love that framework of what's cheap for you and valuable for others. I think that's a really great way to come up with lots of great ideas. And another section that I got to is the idea of packaging, right? And you talked about what your background in the band and the clothes you wore and all these different things. And the one thing I thought of was there's a quote, and maybe it's Eric Weinstein or somebody else, but it's basically like, if you have radical ideas, dress conservatively, be normcore.
Yeah, I think
if you're going to say crazy stuff, right?
Yeah.
So that kind of brought up a question, which is like, how do these things play together, right? Because there's a whole array of principles you can use, but it's sort of like if you go too far on one meter, then you've got to draw the other back another way. Or maybe you disagree. Like, how do you feel about that?
I think the theme for this episode is, and I've not had this theme for an episode, so thank you, is the whole idea of understanding the mass psychology principle and then playing with it, right? So the mass psychology principle, when I say packaging, is not about having cool colors, cool clothing, a cool logo, or conservative clothing or whatever. The idea is that you need to, I'm not going to use the word authenticity because that's one of these words like mission statement that means nothing now. But the idea is you look at the complex being who is Dan Englander, who owns a business, who is the face of a business. And you say to yourself, what is the essence of that and the company it represents that I can weave through everything extremely consistently? And I would say one of the best ways to do that, everyone talks about managing from your strengths, which is good advice, but packaging yourself according to your weaknesses or by flipping your weaknesses is also really good advice. So like Andy Warhol, he's such a legend now that we wouldn't assume this, but before him, the artists that came before him, the abstract expressionists, were very manly men. Think Jackson Pollock. If they were going bald, they went bald. They wore work pants and t-shirts that could get paint splattered all over them. They drank scotch in the morning and went to bed at night, right? Yeah. And Andy Warhol was pathologically shy. He probably had social anxiety disorder. He was gay, which at the time you could get thrown in jail for. He was balding very early. So those were all quote unquote weaknesses in 1950s, 1960s America. He was balding. What did he do? He didn't try to do a comb over. He got a glaring silver wig that everybody knew was a wig. And that's how we think of Andy Warhol now. He was pathologically shy. He didn't go to Toastmasters to try to get less shy. Journalists would come up to him and say, "Why did you paint soup cans?" And he would say, "Because I like soup." Yeah. And he would leave them thinking, what was that? He was gay. I mean, he had trans people in his circle very publicly before anyone did. He wore a leather jacket, which was, people didn't say this overtly, it was what male prostitutes wore, kind of like small leather jacket, and that became his image. So what I would say is, what are those things about you and your company that are potential weaknesses, and how do you flip them into strengths? So like, instead of saying, should I wear conservative, should I wear less conservative clothing, think, what are you trying to say? And what would you feel comfortable doing all the time? And what does it say about your company? And you can do it with a company. Basecamp project management tool, they're playing in a field where no one is going to dominate beyond Salesforce, because Salesforce invented cloud-based project management and CRM tools, right?
Yeah.
So their weakness is that they were small, they were understaffed, and that they didn't have as many features. So what do? They go out and they write rework where they say, having fewer features is better. When your clients tell you to build a feature, say no and turn them away. Simplicity is key. Fire your workaholics.
Yeah, and that's probably, now that I think about it, one of the best companies to embody hype, right?
They're the
And
best. They're the
they're
best.
so good at it.
Yeah.
And
Especially
yeah,
because their tool is boring. Like
right.
it's easy to
It's a
do
message
hype when
board
you're
you can upload
David
files
Bowie,
to. Yeah.
right? It's a project management CRM tool.
Right.
And they've managed to turn it into excitement. It's something you would wear on a t-shirt. I mean, study them. They're so good at it.
Yeah, and there's so many great ideas they come up with. Like, well, I mean, not even them coming up with this, but just the idea of something being defined or valued by what it doesn't do, as opposed to what
Yeah.
it does do. I think is really powerful. One thing I thought of is, how do you feel about the ideas of like risk and timelessness, right? Like, if you define yourself as a person a particular way, it's easy enough to change that. And we all have gone through that as people, from teenage to 20s, 30s,
Yeah.
40s, et cetera. I think as a company though, it's a little bit tougher, right? Because you let's say you rank for certain words, or you're in certain groups, or your customers know you a certain way, you attract certain employees, and you're going to kill a sacred cow, pick a fight and everything. You kind of have to have a certain amount of take a certain amount of risk, and then make a hypothesis that there's a certain amount of timelessness to the way that you see the world, or else you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
Do you agree, or how do you feel about that sort of thing?
I feel like it's really hard, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I feel that when you're small, it's easy to experiment. Even if you're quote unquote successful, you're not there yet, right? So you can conduct a lot of experiments. There's always a better way to attract attention. And we're talking about hype, which is essentially a subset of marketing, but it applies across the board.
Yeah.
But if you're really big S successful, $300 million in revenue or whatever, and you have shareholders, not an owner, right? Or whatever, it's challenging. And we thought for years that the Silicon Valley crew cracked the puzzle, right? Like Google has their 10% time. They have their people working on side projects, or Elon Musk with all of his, innovation and break stuff, or move fast and break stuff, and Mark Zuckerberg. But these people are struggling. I mean, Zuckerberg decided to change who they were and do the meta thing with that same moonshot sort of attitude that built Facebook, and they just laid off 11,000 people. It's a terrible failure so far. Elon Musk, we'll see what happens with Twitter, but I don't know. And Google, the only thing that, I mean, those guys are huge, but none of their moonshots make money. None. Everyone always brings up Gmail, but that was tied to their core business.
Right.
Ads make all their money. None of these self-driving cars and all of this stuff, it's a money suck. So I don't know that I have the answer. I know that keeping your experiments small when it comes to attracting attention and killing them quickly is not only a way to get around this, but it's essential, because like you said, the merry-go-round when it comes to promotion and marketing will always stop. You might be able to sell soy sauce for 300 years, like the company that what is Kikkoman, they're hundreds of years old because it's soy sauce. But the ways you promote that soy sauce, that's always going to change. I mean, because the media changes.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point, because it's like, out of all the big tech startups, most of them got really good at one thing, and then kind of had the resources to be bad at lots of things and still kind of make it work, because they were
Like the
so good at one
Dunning-Kruger
thing.
effect,
It's
right?
the
The idea
Dunning-Kruger
that,
effect.
it's like I'm
Yeah.
such a genius that I'm obviously I also know everything about politics, and I can also reinvent cyberspace into the metaverse, and I can also create self-driving cars. Maybe you're just really good at
Search.
algorithms
Google, yeah.
for
Well,
search. I mean, yeah.
but the funny thing is, the one fly in the ointment is Amazon, right? Because they got really good at a handful of things, and things that are really hard to get good at, right? When you have home delivery, you have
Well,
AWS, you have, not so much the phones, but then acquisitions like Whole Foods and so on. So
AWS is hard to explain because that's their biggest money. I think that was
yeah,
about recognizing so okay, I'm going to try my hand because I
yeah,
I am a professional at this weird form of marketing I do. I'm not going to try to figure out why Jeff Bezos
yeah.
is the richest man in the world, or I am going to try to figure out, but feel free to take what I say with a grain of salt. It seems to me that Bezos is more successful. We'll see what happens with Musk and Zuckerberg. They might be laughing in the future. You know what I mean? I mean,
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. But as of right now, it looks like they're falling on their face, right? But it seems to me that what makes Bezos thrive while these other people don't are maybe twofold. One is that the guy is such a master chess player or poker player or whatever. What he built was his plan from the beginning. Like, he has a business plan. He's like, we're going to be unprofitable for 10 years, use debt and raising money to start with books because it's easy to get into, and we're going to dominate every retail niche. Like, that was the business plan. So it wasn't like he was like, oh, we did books, let's move to shoes. That was the business model from the beginning. It's just so forward thinking that it's hard for most of us to imagine thinking that many steps ahead. I think that's part of it. I also think with the AWS example, so Zuckerberg read in a science fiction novel that it would be cool to have a metaverse, right? So he's building the metaverse, but there's no business opportunity. This is his vanity project. He just has this idea that this is the way the world's going. But based on what? Is anyone clamoring for this? Bezos started AWS because they built the cloud services to host all of their data because they have so much data, and it was so good that people started asking them about it.
Right.
Or they started selling it. You know, it's a very different decision-making process. I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but that seems like
no, that all seems pretty sound. And then there's other stuff that may or may not have contributed to their success that is outlined really well in different books and that kind of thing about leadership principles and so on. But I think that all makes sense.
And success is a moving target. I mean, Elon Musk a year ago could do no wrong, and either could Zuckerberg, and now everyone thinks they're messing up. I mean, who knows? I mean, you know, it's up
the share prices go up and down. It's hard to know how they're going to level out, but kind of like getting, towards the end of the hour, I think another section I wanted to talk about is, I forget the exact name of it, but it was kind of like the milk before meat concept. Can you talk about that a little bit?
It's just the idea. I mean, it's a phrase that a lot of people in religions, missionaries use, that you don't give the babies their milk before you give them their meat. Like, if you walk up to someone and you're like, let me tell you about my new religion where aliens live on the lip of a volcano, or where there's a man who's the son of God, who is a man but is also a spirit, who's redeemed all of humanity by being nailed to a cross. I mean, I'm not mocking the religion. I'm just saying any religion sounds really weird when you introduce it all at once, because it's a break from what we know. And if you introduce it gradually based on things that they do know, it works. And that's because the human brain, I mean, this is actually based on biology. We have certain change thresholds. So if, I don't know, a good example, let's say you're walking through the forest and it turns yellow and orange in 1 second. That's terrifying. Yeah. That's a fire, right? Mm-hmm. But if it turns yellow and orange over 3 months, you don't even notice it. And then you look up, you're like, oh, it's autumn, it's fall. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Because we don't notice incremental changes, and big changes are a threat. So a lot of times I'll hear people who develop something really good and they'll just, you got to use our technology in your company because it's the greatest and it's a no-brainer and it's amazing. And they don't understand. It's so obvious. They're using clunky old DOS-based computers, and they have hologram systems, and they don't understand why. And it's cheap, and it's not even that much money, and it'll save them $1 million a year. And they've shown them the numbers. And how could you not accept this? And it's because their cortisol levels are shooting up, and they don't realize that. They logically talk themselves out of it, but it's very difficult to instantly introduce new things. So the more valuable and unique and different your products and services are, the slower that you can introduce it slowly. But if you don't have that luxury, wrap it in what they're already familiar with. Instead of talking about the holograms, go into their field and figure out what are the terms that they understand. What are the, even the word cloud, right? I mean, most people, a cloud, I have an engineer friend, and he said, I hate the term cloud. It's a network.
Yeah.
He's an engineer. And but isn't cloud better? We all know clouds. We all know what a cloud is. We look at clouds every day. But if you try, it is a network of multiple servers that are distributed over a large geographic entity that you're going to give all of your data to instead of keeping it on your own computer. People are going to be like, whoa, Nelly, but you're like, it's a cloud. It lives in the cloud.
Yeah. And where my head went was like, I know everybody brings up cheesy dating metaphors, but I think it's valid. It's like if you're dating somebody and let's say you're really into like hunting and fishing, but you're dating in a blue state in a city, it's not that the person that you start developing a relationship with can never know about that. They probably should know about that about you,
Right,
but do you want it to be the first thing that they find out
right,
about you?
right,
Because then they're going to
100%.
be like, you're
Yeah.
just this redneck that's hunting and fishing all day, right? So it's the
Focus on
order
what
of
you have in common. I mean,
right,
because you have
right,
something in common. So package yourself. Don't lie,
yeah.
but package yourself. Come from their world.
Or focus, yeah, focus on the order of operations, basically, like
The
what comes
order of
first.
operations, right?
Right,
In
right.
math, right?
The
Focus on
order matters.
what's in the parentheses first, right? Yeah.
Right, right. Because then guess what you become to that person's friends, right? You're the hunting guy,
Right, right.
as
I think
opposed to
that's a
anything
great
else.
example. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. I guess with that, not to put you on the spot, but are there any examples you can talk about of like how clients that have much more boring situations than like the Sex Pistols
Yeah.
are using these ideas?
Yeah. Our clients, I mean, yeah, sure. I mean, we had a client for a long time that the sad thing about what we do now is that we try to bake the hype into our clients' DNA. So eventually they inevitably don't need us anymore because they
Yeah.
distribute our documentation through the organization and the baby grows up. But we worked with this company pop up for quite a while. One of my favorite clients. We still talk all the time. And they have a tool that on the surface is very boring and brass tacks. It's an e-commerce platform, for e-commerce entrepreneurs. So you would say like Shopify, kind of, right? I mean, Shopify is the big player. What makes theirs different is very inside baseball for people who aren't in that world. So it's very flexible in ways that you would have to understand e-commerce to understand. So like there is marketing software built in. So, and it's very flexible. So all the lead generation functionality and all of the traffic functionality is built in. Whereas other programs, you need a developer basically to help you integrate this stuff. So you could sell in that way. You could say, well, it's kind of like Shopify, but it's better than Shopify because it has all this stuff, right? What we thought about was, okay, a couple of things. One of the co-founders of the company, this guy, Matteo Grassi, is a really unorthodox guy, awesome guy, but was a street performer, is a music guy, unusual looking in that he has tattoos, but not in that like corporate kind of way. Like you can tell this guy didn't spend his whole life in the startup world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. So we have that to play with. What else? The functionality, like what are some metaphors that we can use? So what we came up with is Pop-up is a platform as flexible as you are. So the market for the platform is unorthodox people, trans people, people on the outs, people who needed to go into entrepreneurship because their family situation isn't good, people who have ADHD or mental disorders who need entrepreneurship because they know they're going to be out of commission for a month, right? So what do we do to sell that idea? So we also use the Lego metaphor. It's mix and match. Lego is a playground for imagination. It's not just building bricks. You can take Lego and you can follow the instructions, or you can build the craziest fantasy land ever. There are extremely creative, unorthodox people who have Lego as the first thing they use. So they're not saying we're like Lego, but the iconography is like Lego. So now we have things like Matteo has a show, Pop-Up TV online, where he went to a fetish underground community and dressed. He's this big 6-foot guy, big beard, and he dressed in like this rubber dress to like do the interview, right? And he's totally down with the people. They use this very cool, cartoony, blocky Lego imagery. So when they came to us, they had already hired a branding firm. And a lot of branding agencies are great, but they use their imagination. So they just came up with cool graphics, cool logos, cool taglines. We went out and did experiments and saw what people responded to.
Right.
And found all of this out and created this sort of hype. So they reinvented their whole brand according to these guidelines. And then we documented it and they spread it through the organization. So now every LinkedIn post, every piece of content they put out is this a platform as flexible as you. And this is e-commerce backend software.
Yeah.
Right. And we've got guys in rubber dresses, but it's blowing up. I mean, they just started a conference that Chris Doe signed up for. He was one of the speakers. It's based on these principles. They're raising more money. They're growing their user base. It's been I'm honored to say, a huge success. And we do that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter what the product is.
That's really cool. And it matters kind of, obviously conforming that to the audience and everything. And e-commerce is an eccentric place. So that's great.
And it's the back end software. It's not like it's a pop-up store. I mean, they have the stores. It's the stuff behind the scenes, the development stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And making it fun. So Mike, there's so many powerful ideas in this book. I think you and I could go on for a lot longer about this and nerd out on all sorts of historical examples of some of the themes in this book. So definitely encourage everybody to check it out. I guess beyond that, where can people go to follow what you're up to, buy the book, hire you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I guess there's two places. Really, I would say above anything, do check out the book Selfishly and Unselfishly. Unselfishly, I give away all my secrets. So go to Amazon and type in the Hype Handbook. Selfishly, nothing helps us grow more than people reading the book, because the ideas are I believe, unique and workable, and people who read the book tend to, if they're going to buy from us and use our services, that's the best doorway in. But if you want to just find out more about what our company does, it's microfamemedia.com.
Awesome. We'll get that all linked up. Mike, thanks so much, man. Let's do it again.
Thanks, Dan. This was a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, likewise.